David Byrne, ready to go in. Okay, so David Byrne versus the Buddha. So the visionary of eclectic creativity versus the teacher of clarity and liberation. Contrast in perception and reality. David Byrne, musician, artist, and former Talking Heads frontman, is known for his explorations of perception, art, and identity. He wrote, "Sometimes the act of looking for something can be more fulfilling than actually finding it." Byrne's work often celebrates ambiguity and the surreal nature of human experience. The Buddha, while recognizing the richness of perception, taught the danger of clinging to illusions. Perception is fleeting and deceptive. True fulfillment arises when we see through illusions and know things as they are. Quirk and artistic freedom. Byrne's creative approach blends music, performance, and visual art, defying categorization. He observed, art should eliminate the boredom of life. The Buddha, while valuing the transformative power of creativity, warned against using art or experience as an escape. Boredom and distraction arise from craving. Let go of craving, and the mind will find peace beyond the need for escape. Imagine Byrne asking the Buddha, "Is it the act of creating what makes life worth living?" The Buddha might reply, "Creation is meaningful when it reveals truths that do not cling to it. Freedom lies in the peace beyond all acts." Attachment to experience and self-expression. Byrne's art often reflects a fascination with the human condition, inviting others to question norms and embrace absurdity. He stated, "There is a point where we stop and we become. But what if we didn't stop?" The Buddha, however, pointed to the cessation of becoming as the ultimate liberation. To seek experience or self-expression is to perpetuate becoming. Let go of self and becoming, and you will know the stillness of Nibbana. Sutta twist. The Buddha might share the pH in the sutta, the Fena Sutta, foam, where he describes life's experience to foam on a river. Form is like a lump of foam, feeling like a bubble, perception and a mirage. Understanding this, the wise see beyond appearance to the unshaken truths. Byrne, ever inquisitive, might say, "But isn't the beauty of life in its ambiguity?" The Buddha would reply, "Ambiguity is a mask for the mind's craving. True beauty is found in clarity, where the heart is free of confusion." This comparison highlights David Byrne's creative celebration of perception and absurdity, contrasting it with the Buddha's teaching of seeing beyond illusions and clinging to find ultimate freedom. Jackson Pollock is up next, the artist. Jackson Pollock versus the Buddha, the abstract artist of chaos versus the teacher of stillness and insight. Contrasting chaos and clarity, Jackson Pollock, the pioneer of abstract expressionism, revolutionized art with his dynamic drip paintings, capturing motion and emotion without traditional structure. He said, "The painting has a life of its own. I tried to let it come through." Pollock embraced chaos as a source of creativity. The Buddha, while recognizing life's dynamic nature, taught that clarity and liberation arise from stillness. Chaos is born of craving. Stillness reveals the truth beyond all movement and form. Where Pollock sought freedom in expressive spontaneity, the Buddha pointed to the deeper freedom of a quiet mind. Quirk and individuality. Pollock's unorthodox methods, laying canvases on the floor, flinging paint, defied conventions and established him as a rebel in the art world. He declared, "Technique is just a means of arriving at a statement." The Buddha, too, challenged norms, abandoning ritualistic practices to discover the middle way. But he cautioned, techniques are tools. True freedom lies not in expression, but in the end of all grasping. Imagine Pollock asking the Buddha, "Isn't the act of creation itself liberating?" The Buddha might reply, "Creation, it is fleeting. Liberation arises when there is no need to create, only to see." Attachment to expression and identity. Pollock's work reflected his inner struggles, with painting becoming both catharsis and torment. He admitted, every good painter paints what he is. The Buddha, however, saw identity, whether expressed in art or action, as a construct that binds the heart. What you are is impermanent, not self. Let go of the need to express or define, and you'll find freedom beyond becoming. While Pollock's art brought barriers, Buddha brought through illusion of self. There is no artist, no canvas. When this is known, peace arises. Sutta twist, the Buddha might share the Vakali Sutta, where he reminds a monk attached to appearances, why do you cling to form, Vakali? One who sees the Dhamma sees beyond form, and one who sees beyond form sees the truth. Pollock, deeply connected to his expressive process, might say, but isn't chaos part of the beauty of life? Buddha would reply, chaos is beautiful to the eye, but painful to the heart. The greatest beauty is in the stillness where chaos ceases. This comparison highlights Jackson Pollock's chaotic creativity and contrasts it with the Buddha's teaching of finding peace and freedom beyond form, motion, and self-expression. Next is Douglas Murray. Douglas Murray versus the Buddha, the cultural critic of meaning versus the teaching of liberation beyond meaning. Contrasting cultural critique and transcendence, Douglas Murray, author and commentator, critiques the moral and cultural decline of the West, often lamenting the erosion of shared values and purpose. He writes, "We are in an age where everything is permissible, but nothing has meaning." Murray advocates for rediscovering cultural foundations as a way to restore order and meaning. The Buddha, while acknowledging the need for ethical contact, taught that ultimate peace is found not in restoring meaning, but in transcending it. Meaning arises and fades. True freedom is found when the mind lets go of all seeking. Quirk and provocative insight. Known for his incisive critiques and eloquent polemics, Murray challenges prevailing ideologies with sharp wit. He says, the great ideas that shaped our civilization are now seen as suspect. The Buddha, too, challenged the ideologies of his time, dismantling caste systems and blind adherence to rituals. However, the Buddha went beyond critique, offering a path to liberation, to not be bound by ideologies or ideas of civilization. See clearly and walk the path that leads to the end of suffering. Imagine Murray asking the Buddha, how can we restore purpose in a purposeless age? The Buddha might reply, do not seek purpose outside yourself. Freedom is found when you no longer depend on purpose. Attachment to identity and tradition. Murray values cultural heritage and the preservation of identity, warning against the nihilism he sees in modernity. He writes, "We risk throwing away everything without understanding what we are losing." The Buddha, while respecting traditions that lead to ethical living, cautioned against attachment to any identity or heritage. What you cling to as yours is impermanent. Freedom arises when all ideas of mine and self are let go, while Murray seeks restoration of shared values. The Buddha reveals the timeless path beyond all values. As peace is not found in preserving the world, but in understanding its impermanence. Sutta twist, the Buddha might show the Kalama Sutta, which shows questioning all traditions and ideologies. Do not accept something because it is tradition or hearsay. Investigate for yourself. Does it lead to harm or to peace? Murray, concerned with preserving civilization's moral framework, might ask, but without shared values, how can society survive? The Buddha would respond, society survives through ethical conduct and compassion, but freedom is found beyond society, in the stillness of a liberated heart. This comparison contrasts Douglas Murray's cultural critique and search for meaning with the Buddha's teaching of liberation beyond identity, ideology, and meaning itself. We're going to take a look at a new list here, starting with Bill Bryson. But there will be a list, first of all. Bill Bryson, Clive James, Henry VIII of England, Jimi Hendrix, James Bond, movie star, Simone de Beauvoir, Bell Hooks, feminist activities, Mary Wollstonecraft, early feminist, Emmeline Pankhurst, suffragette, Margaret Thatcher, Prime Minister of England, Sir Keith Joseph, cultural minister, Szukalski, who was an artist whose work got lost, Bill Bryson versus the Buddha, chronicler of curiosity versus the unteacher of unfiltered awareness. Contrast in exploration. Bill Bryson, celebrated author of books like A Short History of Nearly Everything and Notes from a Small Island, explores the world with wit and insatiable curiosity. He remarked, "I wanted to know everything about everything." Bryson celebrates the wonder of existence, diving into details and science, history, and human oddities. The Buddha, too, understood the richness of the world, but taught that knowledge alone does not free us. The world is vast and full of wonders, but knowing all things without understanding suffering is like counting leaves while forgetting the root. Quirk and wit. Bryson's charm lies in his ability to notice the absurd in the ordinary, whether recounting travel mishaps or marvelling at the quirks of the English language. He once wrote, "The remarkable thing about life is that it goes on even when nothing particularly remarkable is happening." The Buddha would appreciate this observation, but take it further. Life goes on. The end is impermanent, and yet it is impermanent and unsatisfactory. See this clearly, and you will no longer seek meaning in the ordinary, but freedom beyond it. Imagine Bryson asking the Buddha, "Isn't there joy in simply noticing the little things?" The Buddha might reply, "Notice them, but do not cling to them. Joy arises when awareness is steady and unbound." Attachment to curiosity. Bryson's work thrives on a love of learning for its own sake. He wrote, "Knowledge is everything. It's what separates us from animals." The Buddha, while valuing inquiry, would caution that knowledge rooted in wisdom, not written, can bind the mind. The wise do not gather for its own sake. They see the nature of things. that all arises and passes away. While Bryson revels in the small stuff, the Buddha directs the mind towards the ultimate. The greatest knowledge is not of things, but of the end of suffering. Sutta twist, the Buddha might share the Simsapa Sutta, where he holds a handful of leaves, saying, "What I have taught is like these few leaves. What I know is like the leaves in the forest. What matters is understanding suffering and its end." Bryson, captivated, might reply, "But isn't knowledge itself beautiful?" The Buddha would respond, "Beauty fades. Seek the knowledge that does not fade, the freedom of an unshaken mind." This comparison highlights Bryson's curious, humorous exploration of the world's details and contrasts it with the Buddha's focus on transcending curiosity to uncover ultimate freedom. Let's have a look at a similar person, Clive James. Clive James versus the Buddha, the observer of culture versus the teacher of timeless truths. Contrast and observation. Clive James, the witty critic, poet, and broadcaster, dedicated his life to observing culture, art, and the quirks of human existence. He said, "Stop worrying about being clever. Be clever enough to be kind." James dissected the world with humour and insight, often reflecting on the absurdity of fame, media, and mortality. The Buddha, too, observed the human condition that went further. He, observing the world, is wisdom's beginning, but true understanding comes when we let go of appearances and see the unchanging truths. Where James engaged with the world's follies, the Buddha taught liberation from the need to engage at all. Quirk and wit. James' sharp wit and self-effacing humour defined his public persona. Even facing terminal illness, he wrote, "I am still here, though I don't know why. There must be a reason, so I keep breathing." The Buddha, though, too, recognized life's fleeting nature, but offered a path beyond resignation. Life is short. The wise make peace with impermanence. Breathe not for a reason, but in awareness, and freedom will follow. Imagine James asking the Buddha, "What's the point of it all if it ends anyway?" The Buddha might reply, "The point is not to hold on to, but to let go. Freedom lies not in finding meaning, but in realizing there is nothing to lose, attachment to culture and legacy." James' work reflected a deep love for literature, art, and cultural commentary, which he saw as ways to endure. He amused, "The only perfect view is the memory of what we have seen." The Buddha would gently challenge this nostalgia. Memories are shadows. The past is gone. The future is uncertain. Abide in the present moment. This is where peace is found. Where James sought solace in words, the Buddha taught freedom in relinquishing them. Even the most brilliant words fade. Know this, and you will no longer need to cling. Sutta twist, the Buddha might share the Parinibbana Sutta, where he reflects on impermanence. All conditioned things are impermanent. Strive on with diligence. James, whose valued art's endurance, might respond completely. The Buddha would reply, "What is left behind is but echoes. The wise leave no trace, for their peace is beyond name or form." This comparison contrasts James's witty engagement with life's ephemera with the Buddha's teachings on impermanence, letting go of legacies, and abiding in freedom beyond time. Henry VIII, is ready to step into the spotlight now. Henry VIII versus the Buddha, the king of craving versus the teacher of renunciation. Contrast power and desire. Henry VIII, infamous for his 6 marriages, political manoeuvring, and break from the Catholic Church, epitomized a life ruled by craving, power, control, and sensory indulgence. He once declared, "We are a king, we will be obeyed." Henry's desire reshaped history, but the Buddha warned of the trap of craving. Craving leads to suffering. The more you grasp, the more you burn. Let go, and the fire will cease. Where Henry sought satisfaction through power and decision, the Buddha taught peace through relinquishment, quirk and contradictions. Henry's charisma and cunning often masked his insecurities and instability. He demanded loyalty while severing relationships, both political and personal, without hesitation. His legacy included both grandeur and bloodshed. The Buddha, in contrast, embraced consistency and kindness. True strength is not found in dominating others, but in conquering one's own mind. Imagine Henry asking the Buddha, "What is a king without power?" The Buddha might reply, "A true king worries not over subjects, but over desire." And a reminder, the peace needs no ground. A attachment to ego and legacy. Henry VIII obsessed over his legacy. An heir to success, his line in the church, and a church to secure his control. He believed the king's will is law. The Buddha, born into royalty himself, abandoned such attachments. Fame and power are fleeting shadows. The wise do not cling to what passes away. Where Henry clung to control and self-importance, the Buddha revealed the folly of ego. Asterisk. There is no I to protect, no legacy to secure. Freedom arises when we let go of the illusion of self. Dhammapada, verse 75. The fool seeks power and pleasure. The wise seek no power, for they see the impermanence of all things. Henry, ever defiant, might reply, but a king must leave his mark. A Buddha would respond, marks fade. The greatest freedom is to leave no trace, for there is nothing to defend. This comparison highlights Henry, his life of craving, power, and ego, contrasting it with the Buddha's teaching of renunciation, peace, and freedom from the illusions of control and legacy. Let's have a look at someone very different, Jimi Hendrix. Jimi Hendrix versus the Buddha, the guitar god of transcendence versus the teacher of ultimate liberation. Contrast in Transcendence. Jimi Hendrix, often described as the greatest guitarist of all time, pushed the limits of sound and performance, creating music that felt otherworldly. He said, "When I'm playing music, I'm in a place where I don't have to think. I'm just there." Hendrix saw transcendence through music, touching fleeting moments of freedom. The Buddha, too, spoke of transcendence, but beyond any art, sensation, or experience. True freedom is not found in the moment of ecstasy, but in the end of all becoming. It is the peace of Nibbana, all craving. Quirk and chaos. Hendrix embodied creative chaos, blending genres, sounds, and raw energy. His iconic line, "I'm the one that's got to die when it's time for me to die. So let me live my life the way I want to," captures his defiance and embrace of life's impermanence. The Buddha also taught impermanence, but cautioned against clinging to the fleeting highs of life. All experiences, even the most beautiful, are temporary. To chase them is to suffer. To let go of them is to be free. Imagine Hendrix saying to the Buddha that when I play, I lose myself. What's wrong with that? The Buddha might reply, to lose yourself in music is a glimpse of freedom, but it passes. True freedom is unshakable and leaves no conditions. Attachment to sensation. Hendrix's music was an exploration of sensory boundaries, but his life reflected the cost of excess, addiction, chaos, and an early death at 27. He once mused, "You have to go on and be crazy. Craziness is like heaven." The Buddha would acknowledge this thirst for experience as natural, but ultimately unsatisfying. Pleasure and sensation, however heavenly, lead back to craving. The wise seek a bliss that does not depend on the senses. Hendrix's brilliance burned brightly, but brief, whereas the Buddha's teachings offered a flame that never extinguishes. Nibbana is beyond pleasure and pain, beyond sound and silence. It is the stillness of liberation. Sutta twist, the Buddha might have shared the Salana Sutta, the two arrows that describes the difference between worldly highs and lasting peace. The ordinary person is struck by the arrow of pain and seeks solace and pleasure. But pleasure is fleeting. The wise seek no escape. They let go of craving and find true peace. Hendrix, intrigued yet hesitant, might respond, but life's so short. Why not enjoy it while we can? The Buddha, serene, would reply, enjoyment fades, freedom endures. Know this, and you will no longer chase what cannot last. This comparison highlights Hendrix's ecstatic artistry, contrasting it with the Buddha's teachings on lasting liberation, where the fleeting beauty of sensation gives way to timeless peace. Another entertainer, James Bond, with many different actors. James Bond versus the Buddha, the secret agent of desire versus the teacher of liberation. Contrasting desires, James Bond, the iconic fictional spy, epitomizes indulgence, fast cars, danger, beautiful women, and shaken martinis. He thrives on risk and sensory pleasures. Bond's life reflects a craving for excitement captured in his manpower. The world is not enough mantra. The Buddha, however, taught that desire is endless and unsatisfying. Craving for pleasure, power, or excitement only leads to more craving. The wise abandon desire and find peace, while Bond clings to the thrill of life. The Buddha reveals the emptiness beneath it. The world cannot satisfy. Freedom comes when the mind no longer seeks. Quark, an illusion of control. Bond's polished charm, impeccable suits, and gadgets mask a deeper vulnerability, a fleeting nature of his victories, even as he defeats enemies. Another thread always arises. The Buddha would see the cycle as samsara, the endless round of struggle. Defeating one only gives rise to another. True victory lies in defeating the craving that fuels all conflict. Imagine Bond quipping to the Buddha, without risk and adventure, what's the point? The Buddha might reply, adventure exists in understanding your own mind. The greatest mission is the one that ends suffering. Attachment to identity, Bond's entire persona, spy, seducer, hero, is built on roles and expectations. He is, as M once said, a blunt instrument. Yet the Buddha taught that clinging to identity, even heroic roles, creates suffering. This I, this self, is a construct. To let go of it is to discover true freedom. Bond's world depends on masks and illusions, whereas the Buddha dismantled all masks, revealing the truth. Asterisk. Neither the hero nor the villain exists beyond their mind. Lay down the rules and peace will arise. Sutta twist. The Buddha might have shared the Dhammacettiya Sutta, which praises non-violence. Victory breeds non-hatred. Peaceful is the one who lives without conflict, free of victory and defeat. Bond, smirking but curious, might say, without enemies, there is no mission. The Buddha would counter, your mission ends when you defeat the enemy within, craving, aversion, and delusion. Then there is nothing left to fight. This comparison composes thrills of life of desire, control, and identity with the Buddha's path of relinquishment, wisdom, and peace. Let's move on to Simone de Beauvoir. Ready for another philosophical duel. Simone de Beauvoir versus the Buddha. The advocate of freedom through existence versus the teacher of liberation beyond all existence. Contrast in freedom. Simone de Beauvoir, existentialist philosopher and feminist, proclaimed that freedom is the essence of human existence. Man is condemned to be free, because once thrown into the world, he is responsible for everything he does. The Beauvoir argued that existence precedes essence, that we create meaning through choices. The Buddha, too, valued freedom, but it was freedom from existence itself. Existence, born of craving, is suffering. True liberation comes not from choosing, but in ceasing to grasp, where de Beauvoir sought freedom in creating meaning. The Buddha saw freedom in creating, in transcending the need to create meaning. De Beauvoir fiercely rebelled against social and gender norms, exposing the constraints imposed by systems of power. She wrote in The Second Sex, one is not born, but rather becomes a woman. She dismantles the idea of fixed identity, empowering individuals to claim their autonomy. The Buddha, similarly, exposed identity as a construct that went further. Identity is empty, impermanent, not self. Let go of becoming, and you will find true peace. Imagine de Beauvoir asking the Buddha, but isn't freedom created through resistance? The Buddha might reply, resist, but do not cling. The greatest freedom is not in becoming, but in letting go. Attachment to meaning and struggle. De Beauvoir embraced struggle as central to human existence. She stated, it is in the knowledge of the genuine conditions of our lives that we must store our strength to live and our reason for acting. The Buddha would gently challenge this attachment to struggle. To find strength and struggle is noble, but to transcend struggle is freedom. The wise abandon the fight, for they see the root of suffering. Where de Beauvoir saw meaning in resistance, the Buddha taught peace through relinquishing the need to resist. Neither becoming nor unbecoming leads to freedom. It is found in stillness beyond striving. Sutta twist. The Buddha might share the Attavagga, the Buddha Atthakavagga, the Book of Eights, which critiques all attachments. Those who hold no views cling to no ideas, and seek no becoming. They are free. They live at peace, unshaken. De Beauvoir, driven by existential freedom, might ask, but how can we live authentically without struggle? The Buddha would respond, authenticity arises when the struggle ceases. To live without clinging, without fear, is the most genuine freedom. This comparison highlights Simone de Beauvoir's existential commitment to freedom and resistance, while contrasting it with the Buddha's teaching of liberation, not through struggle, but through relinquishment of all becoming. Bell Hooks is up next. Bell Hooks versus the Buddha, the advocate of love and justice versus the teacher of boundless compassion. Contrasting love and liberation, Bell Hooks, celebrated author and social critic, saw that there was seen as a radical force. She wrote, love is a combination of care, commitment, knowledge, responsibility, respect, and just. Hooks argued that societal transformation begins with the courage to love authentically. The Buddha, too, emphasizes love, but redefined it as loving kindness, metta, free from attachment. Free love is boundless, asking for nothing in return. It frees the heart and affects all beings, while Hooks saw love as a tool for change. The Buddha saw it as a path to liberation. Quirky and resistance. Hooks' resistance, systems of oppression, critiquing racism, sexism, and materialism while advocating for interconnectedness. She stated, there can be no love without justice. The Buddha, while recognizing systemic harm, taught that justice begins with understanding the mind. Hatred does not cease by hatred, but by love alone. Start with your own heart, and the world will follow. Imagine Hooks asking the Buddha, but how can love heal without addressing oppression? The Buddha might reply, love rooted in wisdom and compassion breaks oppression at its root, craving, aversion, and delusion, attachment to action and ideals. Hooks' work inspired action driven by a belief in justice as the foundation for a better world. She wrote, without justice, we cannot sustain hope. The Buddha, too, valued action, but warned against clinging to outcomes. Justice arises when the mind is free from craving and fear. Act wisely, but let go of results. Freedom is not found in the world, but beyond it. Where Hooks found meaning in the fight for justice, the Buddha offered liberation from the end of all striving. The wise act with compassion, but they do not cling to the fruits of their actions. Sutta twist, the Buddha might share the Metta Sutta, which extols the power of unconditional love. As a mother loves her only child, so too should one cultivate boundless love for all beings, without exception. Hooks inspired yet questioning, and she might say, can love alone bring it to the freedom to the oppressed? The Buddha said, love rooted in wisdom transformed the world without division. Justice without love creates conflict, but love guided by clarity frees all beings. This comparison highlights Bell Hooks' transformative vision of growth and justice and contrasts it with the Buddha's teachings on loving kindness and liberation, where compassion is boundless and free of attachment. Mary Wollstonecraft is ready to step into the dialogue next. Mary Wollstonecraft versus the Buddha. the pioneer of women's rights versus the teacher of universal liberation. Contrasting liberation, Mary Wollstonecraft, the author of A Vindication of the Rights of Women, challenged equality and education as path to womanhood. As pastor, she wrote, "I do not wish women to have power over men, but over themselves." Wollstonecraft sought justice through reason, demanding the dismantling of oppressive systems. The Buddha, too, worked for liberation, but at a deeper level. Freedom does not come from equality in the world, but from ending craven and delusion. True power is mastery over the mind. While the Wollstonecraft sought for societal justice, the Buddha revealed the path to transcend all forms of oppression. Quirky and conviction. Wollstonecraft's fiery intellect and emotional resilience marked her as a revolutionary. She declared strength and the female mind by enlarging it, and there will be an end to blind obedience. The Buddha similarly valued mental cultivation, teaching blind obedience arises from ignorance. Wisdom is the light that frees all beings, male or female. Imagine Wollstonecraft asking the Buddha, shouldn't women demand justice through reason and action? The Buddha might reply, reason and action can open doors, but true freedom arises when the mind is no longer bound by any identity or role. Attachment to justice and ideals. Wollstonecraft's commitment to equality and moral virtue shaped her work, but it also reflected the tension between striving and imperfection. She wrote, "No man chooses evil because it is evil. He only mistakes it for happiness." The Buddha agreed that delusion drives harm, but taught that clinging to justice itself can cause conflict. Justice pursued with craving binds the heart. The wise act with compassion, unattached to results. Wollstonecraft saw equality as the path to fulfillment. The Buddha pointed beyond fulfillment altogether. Freedom is not found in the world's systems, but in the stillness of a liberated mind. Sutta twist, the Buddha might have shared the Chula Sachika Sutta, where he dismantles pride and identity, and clinging to any identity, strong or weak, brings suffering. Let go of self, and the heart will be free. Wollstonecraft, passionate yet reflective, might respond, but isn't entity needed to end oppression? The Buddha might reply, fight oppression with wisdom, not attachment. True liberation comes when all identities are laid down. This comparison captures Mary Wollstonecraft's revolutionary zeal for justice and contrasts it with the Buddha's path of universal liberation, beyond roles, identities, and worldly striving. Next up, Emmeline Pankhurst is up next, bringing the fire of suffrage into the conversation. Emmeline Pankhurst versus the Buddha, the suffragette of action versus the teacher of inner freedom, contrast in freedom. Emmeline Pankhurst, a leader of the suffragette movement, fought for women's right to vote, declaring, "We are here not because we are lawbreakers, we are here hearing our efforts to become lawmakers." Pankhurst believed that systemic change was essential for liberation. The Buddha, while acknowledging the value of justice, taught a deeper freedom beyond all systems, the mind unshaken by laws, on power free from craving and aversion, is truly liberated. Where Pankhurst demanded external rights, the Buddha revealed the path to inner freedom, unbound by conditions. Quirk and militancy, Pankhurst activism was bold and uncompromising. From hunger strikes to public protests, she declared, "Deeds, not words, will change history." Her fiery commitment often led to imprisonment and force feeding, yet she remained resolute. The Buddha, too, valued action, but taught a gentler, wisdom-based approach. These rooted in wisdom and compassion bring lasting change. Act without hatred, and the mind remains at peace. Imagine Pankhurst challenging the Buddha. How can we win freedom without fighting for it? The Buddha might reply, fight, but fight wisely. Hatred cannot defeat hatred. Only love can do that. Attachment to struggle. Pankhurst's life was defined by the suffragette struggle, believing that persistence would shape a better future. She said, "Justice and judgment lie often a world apart." The Buddha recognized this tension, but warned against attachment to struggle itself. The struggle against justice, when tied to craving or anger, deepens suffering. Freedom arises when struggle ends and wisdom prevails. What Pankhurst saw meaning in resistance, the Buddha taught peace beyond resistance. True liberation is not found from winning, but in letting go. Sutta twist. The Buddha might have shared the Parabhata Sutta, the discourse on downfall, which explains how craving and hatred lead to decline. The one who acts with wisdom, free from malice, brings true victory to the world. Pankhurst, fiercely determined, might say, but without struggle, nothing changes. The Buddha would reply, change begins within. Struggle may alter the world, but wisdom and love transform the heart. This comparison contrasts Emmeline Pankhurst's unyielding fight for external freedom with the Buddha's teaching of inner liberation, where wisdom and compassion overcome the need for struggle. Margaret Thatcher is poised to enter the dialogue next. Margaret Thatcher versus the Buddha, the Iron Lady of Conviction versus the teacher of balance and letting go. Contrast in conviction. Margaret Thatcher, the UK's first female Prime Minister, was defined by her unyielding determination and belief in individual responsibility. She declared, "Watch your thoughts, for they will make you." Thatcher valued strength, self-reliance, and decisive action, often to polarizing effect. The Buddha, while also emphasizing personal responsibility, taught that clinging to conviction, even noble ones, can lead to suffering. Thoughts shape us, but freedom comes when we see beyond them, when the mind lets go of all views and stands at peace. Quirk and inflexibility. Thatcher's intimate statement, "The lady's not for turning," embodied her refusal to compromise, even in the face of criticism. Her iron will shaped British politics, but also created division. The Buddha, in contrast, taught the middle way, neither rigid nor indulgent. Rigidity of mind leads to suffering. The wise adapt, finding balance in all things. Imagine Thatcher asking the Buddha, "Doesn't conviction show strength of character?" The Buddha might reply, "Strength lies in wisdom, not rigidity. The unshaken mind bends with the wind, but never breaks." Attachment to control and legacy. Thatcher's policies, rooted in economic liberalism, prioritize control and structure, reflecting her belief in shaping the future through disciplined actions. She once remarked, "Watch your actions, for they will determine your character and destiny. The Buddha, while also valuing ethical action, cautioned against attachment to results. Actions matter, but do not cling to their fruits. Control over the world is fleeting. True freedom comes from releasing control altogether. What Thatcher sought to build a legacy, the Buddha taught the wisdom of letting go of all ambitions. The wise leave no trace, for they seek not fame, but peace. Sutta twist. The Buddha might have shared the Chula Karma Vibhanga Sutta, which explains how actions shape results, but cautions against clinging. What we do matters, but to be free, act without attachment. Let go of the need to control outcomes. Thatcher, resolute yet reflective, might respond, but isn't shaping the world through action. What defines us? The Buddha would answer, to shape the world is temporary. To shape the mind is lasting. Freedom lies not in controlling, but releasing all that binds. This comparison contrasts Margaret Thatcher's resolute leadership and focus on control with the Buddha's teaching of balance, wisdom, and liberation that comes from relinquishing attachment to results and legacy. Her minister, Sir Keith Joseph, is next. Sir Keith Joseph versus the Buddha, the architect of ideological renewal versus the teacher of inner liberation. Contrast in reform. Sir Keith Joseph, a key architect of Thatcherism, championed free market policies and individual responsibility as solutions to society's stagnation. He argued, we must stop blaming society for the choices of individuals. Joseph saw progress through systemic reform, but the Buddha looked deeper, teaching systems are shaped by minds. Reform the mind, free it from craving and from... While Joseph focused on external renewal, the Buddha revealed the path to inner transformation as the path to true freedom. Quirk and idealism. Joseph, his intellectualism and policy ideas often reflected an uncompromising idealism, leading some to recall him the high priest of Thatcherism. His belief in rational reform occasionally clashed with the complexity of human behavior. The Buddha, too, valued clarity, but recognized that rationality alone is insufficient. Reason can guide, but wisdom sees the whole and understands not just systems, but the impermanent, unsatisfactory, and selfless nature of all things. Imagine Joseph asking the Buddha, isn't rational reform the way to improve society? The Buddha might reply, reform begins within. Without freeing the mind, no system will bring lasting peace. Attachment to ideology. Joseph's unwavering commitment to economic liberalism reflected a deep belief in the power of ideas to shape reality. He stated, we must teach self-reliance and free individuals from dependency. The Buddha valued self-reliance, but cautioned against clinging to any ideology. Clinging to views, even noble ones, binds the mind. True freedom comes from not through systems, but letting go of all views. Joseph thought solutions through ideologies. The Buddha transcended them, teaching liberation from all constructs. Systems arise and fall. Wisdom sees beyond them to the unconditional peace of Nibbana. Sutta twist. The Buddha might have shared the Brahma Jala Sutta, which critiques attachment to views. The wise cling not to this or that. They bend in all ideologies and walk the insight path of peace. Joseph, driven by his vision of reform, might say that without ideas, How can we guide society? The Buddha would respond, ideas guide, but freedom lies beyond them. Reform your own mind, and you will reform the world without effort. This comparison highlights Sir Keith Joseph's ideological conviction and reformist zeal, contrasting it with the Buddha's teaching on inner transformation, liberation beyond systems and views. Next, Szukalski, whose lost art was discovered by DiCaprio and broadcast. Szukalski versus the Buddha, the artist of myth and the teacher of non-clinging. Contrasting legacy and creation. Stanislav Szukalski, the eccentric Polish sculptor and painter, dedicated his life to creating a personal mythology, whose Zomatism exploring the roots of human creativity and identity. It was discovered and broadcast by Leonardo da Vinci. DiCaprio, helped to revitalize the awareness of him, the lost art of Szukalski. Both figures represent a quest for meaning, one through art, one through activism. The Buddha, while acknowledging creativity and purpose, taught that true freedom lies beyond such pursuits. Creations and legacies, however great, are impermanent. Let go of clinging to identity, and you will find lasting peace. Quirk and obsession. Szukalski's art and theories were deeply eccentric, blending genius with an obsessive need to define humanity's origins. He once claimed, "My art is not about forms, it's about the spirit within them." DiCaprio, in contrast, channels his fame into activism, stating, "Climate change is the most urgent threat facing our entire species." The Buddha, while valuing focus and purpose, warned of dangers of obsession. To seek answers in creation or action without understanding impermanence is to remain bound. Freedom comes when the mind is no longer grasping. Attachment to identity and purpose. Szukalski's identity was inseparable from his art and mythology, just as DiCaprio's activism defined his public image. Both sought meaning in their contributions. The Buddha, however, taught the emptiness of identity and purpose. Identity is a construct, and purpose is fleeting. Clinging to either binds the heart. True freedom arises when all roles and pursuits are abandoned. While Szukalski and DiCaprio focused on creation and preservation, the Buddha pointed to a peace beyond the need for either. Creation is impermanent, preservation is impermanent. The wise see this and let go. Sutta twist, the Buddha might have shared the Samyutta Nikaya 2295, the burden, which explains the weight of clinging to identity and purpose. Carrying the burden of self, we suffer. Laying it down, we are free. Szukalski, passionate yet introspective, might ask, but doesn't art reveal the truth of existence? The Buddha would reply, art points to truth, but truth lies beyond form. To see the ultimate is to let go of the need to create. DiCaprio, committed to his activism, might ask, how can we let go when the world needs saving? The Buddha might answer, save the world with wisdom, but do not cling. True change arises when the heart is free. This comparison, contrast, Szukalski's artistic obsession and DiCaprio's activist purpose with the Buddha's teaching on transcending identity, creation, and legacy to discover the unconditional peace of liberation. That's all for this section, this list. I hope you have benefited. May many beings be free from suffering.